On the anniversary of my husband's death, my son drove me to the cemetery. He led me to our family plot and said coldly, "Dad's waiting for you. This is your place now, beside him. Goodbye." Then he walked away, leaving me alone in the freezing twilight. But he didn't know that his father had left me a letter hidden beneath the headstone. After reading it, I smiled for the first time that day. My son had no idea what was waiting for him in the morning. 1 year. An entire year without Michael. The calendar on my kitchen wall had mercilessly counted 365 days, but for me, time had stopped on that February afternoon when he passed away. Today's morning felt no different from all the others. The same gray sky outside, the same quiet hum of our small town waking up. But inside me was a ringing silence that I only knew on this particular day. I decided to keep the memorial service small and intimate. Not for guests, but for memory. For myself and for him. From early morning, my kitchen was filled with that special scent that only comes on sorrowful occasions. I prepared the traditional rice pudding, measuring each grain carefully, washing it in cold water until it ran completely clear. I cooked it slowly, watching every kernel, then added soaked raisins, chopped walnuts, and a spoonful of honey. Each gesture felt like a ritual. Like a conversation with Michael that I held in the silence of my mind. "Remember how you loved extra nuts? And the raisins had to be the sweetest ones." On the stove, thin pancakes were already browning. The first one, as tradition demanded, I placed on a separate plate and set it on the windowsill for the departed souls. This is what my mother did, and her mother before her. It wasn't just tradition. It was an invisible thread connecting generations, a lifeline that stretched from the past and warmed the cold present. Our house. This old Victorian in the center of town was filled with him. His books lined every wall in the study from floor to ceiling. His favorite armchair, slightly worn on the armrests. His photographs on the dresser. Here we were, young and squinting in the Florida sunshine. And there he was, gray-haired but with that same boyish spark in his eyes, holding our little Vincent on his shoulders. The doorbell rang sharply, cutting through my memories. I knew it was them. Vincent and his wife Marina. I straightened the dark shawl on my shoulders and went to open the door. They entered, bringing with them the scent of cold air and expensive perfume. Marina's sharp eyes quickly scanned the set table. Her thin lips curved into a barely visible sneer. "Hello, Eleanor. Still fussing around, I see. Your house is like a museum, you know. Every time I come here, I feel like I'm on a tour." Her voice was sweet as syrup, but the words stung, as always. I remained silent. After 40 years with Michael, I had learned to distinguish when words had weight and when they were just empty sounds meant to hurt. Marina's words belonged to the second category. "Hello, son." I turned to Vincent. He avoided my gaze, looked somewhere at the bookshelves, then at his shoes, and handed me a bouquet of carnations wrapped in cellophane. "Hi, Mom." There was no warmth in his voice, only exhaustion and a dull irritation. He walked into the living room without even removing his coat. "We're not staying long," Marina said, placing her patent leather purse on the antique dresser, which I couldn't stand. "Lots to do. Need to look to the future, not live in the past." "Right, Vinny." Vincent made a noncommittal grunt in response, continuing to study the pattern on the parquet floor. I put the carnations in a vase and looked at the table, at the rice pudding, at the stack of pancakes. "Maybe we could remember Dad." "Please, sit down, I'll put the kettle on." "Mom, not now," Vincent said sharply. He finally raised his eyes to me, and in them was cold determination. "Get ready. It's time to go to the cemetery." "Of course, son. Let's go together." "Just the two of us," he interrupted. "Marina's not feeling well. She'll stay home." And why all these ceremonies anyway? We'll just go and that's it. Marina, who looked healthier than all of us, sighed sympathetically and pressed her palm to her forehead, pretending to have a migraine. It was a poorly rehearsed performance, but I pretended to believe it. Perhaps my son really did want to be alone with his father's memory. This thought pricked my heart like a thin needle of hope. Maybe he wanted to talk, to be silent together, like we used to. I silently put on my old wool coat, tied a warm scarf over my head, and took my purse. Marina watched me go with a look that held not a drop of sympathy, only impatient anticipation. In the car, we rode in silence. Snow-covered streets flashed by the window, gray houses, hurrying pedestrians. The silence in the car was thick, almost tangible. Several times I tried to start a conversation, to say something about his father, to remember some bright moment, but Vincent answered in monosyllables, never taking his eyes off the road. Ice-cold alienation emanated from him in waves, and I felt myself freezing from the inside even before we arrived at the cemetery. Here were the familiar gates. Snow-covered paths, black silhouettes of crosses and monuments against the white blanket. The car slowly drove deeper into our family plot. Here lay my parents, Michael's parents. And now him. We got out of the car. The cold wind immediately crept under my coat, making me shiver. Vincent took out the carnations and silently placed them on the granite slab under which his father lay. I stood nearby, looking at the golden letters carved in stone, Michael Richard Thompson. 1958 to 2023, an entire life in 2 dates. My life. Twilight was falling quickly. The sky turned from gray to purple. Vincent stood for another minute, then turned to me. His face in this merciless cold light seemed alien. The face of a stranger. "Well, Mom," he said in an even voice devoid of all emotion. "Dad's waiting for you." I didn't understand. I looked at him, trying to grasp the meaning of these strange words. Maybe I misheard. He took a step back toward the car. "This is your place now." Next to him. "Goodbye." And at that moment, my world cracked. Not with a crash, not with an explosion. It simply split, like thin ice underfoot. I looked at him, at my son, at this 40-year-old man whom I had rocked in my arms, to whom I had read bedtime stories, for whom Michael and I had sacrificed everything. And he looked at me the way you look at an old, unnecessary thing that needs to be thrown away. He got in the car. The engine started with a quiet rumble. For a moment, the headlights picked out my face from the twilight, then the car turned around and drove away down the snow-covered path. The red taillights grew smaller and smaller until they dissolved in the thickening darkness. I was left alone. Around me was only the silence of the cemetery, broken by the creaking of branches under the weight of snow. The cold penetrated to my bones, but inside me it suddenly became absolutely calm. The shock was so strong that it pushed out all feelings, pain, resentment, and fear. I didn't cry. The tears froze somewhere deep inside, turning to ice. Instead, something else came. It was like a click. As if some old, rusty mechanism had turned inside me. A switch in my consciousness flipped from the position mother to some other, new position, still unknown to me. My whole life, built on love, duty, and self-sacrifice, crumbled to dust here at my husband's grave. And on these ruins, something new was being born, cold, clear, and irreversible. I stood in the cold twilight, looking at Michael's grave, and for the first time in this terrible year, I felt not grief, but absolute, deafening clarity. As if a veil I had worn for 40 years had fallen from my eyes. I stood there, and the cold seemed to penetrate not only under my coat but into my very soul. But this was a different kind of cold now. Not the kind that makes you shiver, but the kind that freezes, gives firmness. Around me was silence, and in this silence I looked at the granite stone with my Michael's name. Goodbye. This word, thrown by my son, still hung in the frosty air, but it no longer wounded me. It became a period. A period after which a new paragraph begins. And then I remembered. The memory came not from my head, but as if from my fingertips. A year ago, shortly before the end, Michael and I had come here. He was already weak, but insisted on choosing the place, ordering the monument. So you won't have to worry about it later, Ellie. He sat on a folding chair while I stood beside him. He looked at the still smooth, unprocessed slab for a long time, then ran his hand along its base, near the very ground. Heavy, he said quietly. Reliable. If you ever feel like the ground is slipping from under your feet, just touch it. All our strength is in the foundation here. Then I thought it was just a beautiful metaphor, a way to comfort me. But now, in this deafening silence, his words sounded like instructions. I knelt right in the snow, not feeling the cold. I ran my hand where his hand had touched. Rough, icy granite. My fingers found a small indentation, almost invisible. I pressed, and something gave way. In a niche carved into the stone lay a thick, waterproof package wrapped in tape. It was cold and heavy. I got to my feet, holding this unexpected find. My heart, which until this moment had been an icy lump, suddenly began to beat dully, strongly. I walked over to a bench under an old maple tree, brushed the snow off it, and sat down. My hands trembled slightly as I tore through the layers of tape. Inside was a large envelope, and in it several sheets of paper covered with Michael's familiar, slightly sweeping handwriting. My beloved Ellie, the letter began. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And it means what I feared most has happened. I don't know exactly what, but I know you needed the strength I talked about. Forgive me. Forgive me for leaving you alone to deal with this world, and forgive me for the secret I kept our entire life. I read, and the lines blurred before my eyes, not from tears, but from shock. Michael wrote about Vincent, about how he wasn't his biological son. It happened long before me. A brief, almost accidental romance during a business trip. A young woman who realized too late that she was pregnant. She found Michael when nothing could be changed anymore. And then she died in childbirth, leaving him with a tiny boy. She had no one at all. Michael was in despair, and 6 months later he met me. When he realized he loved me, he told me everything. It was his first and last confession. We made the decision together. We adopted the boy and raised him as our own. We gave him our name, our love, our lives. We agreed it would be our secret. A secret for two. I sat looking at the letters, and my whole life flashed through my head. The eternal guilt that I couldn't love Vincent with that all-consuming, blind maternal love. His detachment, his eternal search for himself, his underlying dissatisfaction with everything we gave him, his inability to be truly grateful. Suddenly everything fell into place. He wasn't our blood, he was our choice, our duty, our responsibility. I saw his weakness, Ellie, Michael wrote further. I saw the predatory gleam in his wife's eyes. I saw how they looked at our house, at the cabin, as a resource, not as a home. I was afraid that when I was gone, they would try to break you. That's why I had to protect you. I'm not writing this so you'll stop loving him. I know you can't. You raised him. But I want you to know, you owe him nothing. Everything we could give him, we already gave. Your sacrifices, your teaching career that you left, your inheritance from your parents that went to his education and the down payment on his first car. All of this was your gift. But a gift doesn't make you an eternal debtor. And then came the main paragraph, everything we have, the house, the cabin, our modest savings, legally belongs only to you. I took care of this many years ago when I rewrote the deed. This isn't jointly acquired property. This is yours, your fortress, your freedom. Do with it as you see fit. Live for yourself, Ellie. You've earned it more than anyone else. I love you very much. You're Michael. I finished reading the letter and slowly folded the sheets, put them back in the envelope, and tucked it deep into the inner pocket of my coat. There, where my heart was, there was no more cold. Inside me, a quiet, steady fire was kindling. This wasn't anger or thirst for revenge. This was a feeling of liberation. As if an unbearable weight had been lifted from my shoulders, a weight I had carried for 40 years without even realizing its heaviness. Love for the boy I raised didn't go anywhere. It remained, as a scar from an old wound remains. But the heavy lead chain of duty that had bound me to his selfishness and ingratitude fell with a clang onto the frozen ground of this cemetery. I got up from the bench and looked at my husband's grave. "Thank you, darling," I whispered. "Thank you for protecting me even from there." I didn't go to the exit where my son's car had driven away. I went the other way, toward the side gates that opened onto a busy street. I walked steadily, confidently. My back was straight. Each step was filled with a new strength I had never known before. At the gates, I stopped and raised my hand. Almost immediately, a yellow taxi pulled up beside me. "Where to, ma'am?" asked the driver, a middle-aged man. I got in the back seat and gave the address of the nearest decent hotel I could remember. Not home. Under no circumstances home. Home had stopped being my refuge. It had become a battlefield, and I needed to return there prepared. The car started moving. I looked out the window at the flickering lights of the city and didn't recognize it, or didn't recognize myself in it. At the hotel, I rented a small but cozy room. The first thing I did was take my phone out of my purse. My fingers weren't trembling. I found the number in my address book. Not a lawyer's number, not the police. The number of someone I trusted absolutely. My great-niece Emma, daughter of my late niece. A bright, intelligent, honest girl, a law student, the only person in our large family who always called just to ask how I was doing. Who listened to my stories about books and didn't consider me a museum exhibit. I pressed call. After a few rings, her clear voice came through. "Aunt Eleanor." "Hello. I was just about to call you, to offer my condolences. How are you?" I took a deep breath. "Hello, Emma. I'm fine, even better than you think. I really need your help." After hanging up from talking to Emma, I felt warmth spreading through my body. Her voice, full of sincere concern and then determined support, was like a sip of water in the desert. "Aunt Eleanor, I understand everything. I'm coming right now. Don't be afraid of anything. We'll sort this all out." She didn't ask unnecessary questions, didn't gasp, didn't lecture me. She simply believed me. For the first time in many years, someone believed me without reservations. I sat in this faceless hotel room that could have been in any city in the world. Cream walls, standard furniture, a view of the lights from other people's windows. And in this anonymity, I felt safer than in my own apartment, saturated with memories. I could imagine in the smallest detail what was happening that evening in my house. My imagination, honed by decades of reading good books, painted this scene with merciless accuracy. Vincent returns from the cemetery, enters the apartment, shakes snow off his coat. Marina meets him in the hallway. Her face is a mask of impatient questioning. He doesn't say a word, just nods. It's done. And I see her tense shoulders relax, and that triumphant smile appears on her lips that she usually saved for buying especially expensive things. A predator's smile after catching prey. "Finally, Vinny," she whispers, and her voice drips with relief. "Finally we can breathe freely." He probably goes into the living room, heavily sinks into Michael's chair. In his soul, I want to believe this, something like shame is still stirring. But Marina doesn't let this feeling take root. She goes to the special bar, Michael's bar, where he kept his collection of brandy, each bottle of which he brought from trips or received as gifts. She takes out the most expensive one, the one with the heavy wax seal. The one Michael was going to open for their 10th wedding anniversary, which he didn't live to see. She pours brandy into thin glasses. The golden liquid gleams in the light of the old chandelier. To freedom, she says, raising her glass. And to our future. Vincent, hesitating for a second, raises his. To the future, he repeats, and his voice sounds more like self-hypnosis than joy. Now comes the most interesting part. The freed space needs to be immediately filled with something. And Marina knows what. She sits on the sofa, tucking her legs under herself, and takes out her tablet. Cold bluish light from the screen falls on her face, making it even sharper and more alien in this warm, lived-in interior. I see her finger sliding across the screen. Pictures of another life flash by. Glass walls, panoramic windows, minimalist furniture, chrome steel. Penthouses, apartments, lofts. Look, Val, she says without looking up from the screen. Here's the 30th floor downtown. View of the whole city. Can you imagine? No dusty bookshelves, no creaking parquet. Just air, light, and modern design. We'll sell this old place, the cabin, and we'll have just enough. Even money left over for renovation. She says of this old place, while sitting on the sofa that Michael and I bought back in the 80s, reupholstered when Vincent was born. She looks at pictures of sterile interiors while in a room where every object has its own history, where the photograph on the wall isn't a decorative element but a frozen moment of happiness. Vincent approaches, looks over her shoulder. He might want to object, to say that his childhood is here, that everything is familiar here, but he's silent. He's too weak to resist her pressure. Her hunger for a new glossy life is contagious. She promises him success, status, freedom from the shadow of his successful father and eternally dissatisfied mother. He gives in. He gave in long ago. Yes, not bad, he mumbles, and Marina smiles triumphantly. To seal the success, they need a celebratory dinner. Not my pancakes and rice pudding. Something worthy of their new status. Let's order steaks from the best restaurant, she suggests. And a bottle of good wine. Let's celebrate properly. Vincent agrees. He takes out his phone, finds the website, chooses the most expensive items on the menu, clicks pay, and takes out his gold credit card from his wallet, that additional card tied to my account. The card I gave him for emergencies when he was having problems at work again. The emergency, apparently, had arrived. He enters the data, waits, and then a red inscription appears on the screen, payment declined. What's this nonsense, he frowns. Maybe some kind of glitch. He tries again. Same result. Marina looks up from her tablet. What's wrong? Payment won't go through on the card. He calls the delivery service. A polite voice on the other end informs him that the problem isn't on their end. Sorry, your card was declined by the issuing bank. Vincent hangs up. His face shows bewilderment and growing irritation. And here Marina, of course, understands everything. Or rather, thinks she understands. She lets out a short, contemptuous laugh. Ah, I get it. Mama decided to throw a tantrum. She's offended. Blocked the card. Well, how about that? What drama? Kindergarten, honestly. She thinks this will scare us. Decided to play independent. Vincent looks at her, and his irritation gives way to uncertainty. You think so? What else? Marina snorts. Where's she going to go? She'll cry into her pillow at some friend's house for a night, get cold, get hungry, and tomorrow by lunch she'll be back, sweet as pie. She'll even ask for forgiveness for getting carried away. She goes up to him and puts her arms around his neck. Don't worry, honey. This is her last pathetic attempt to manipulate us. She'll get over it. They laugh. Their laughter echoes through my apartment. The laughter of people sure of their righteousness and impunity, blind in their arrogance. I sat in the silence of the hotel room, and this imaginary laughter rang in my ears. They didn't understand. They understood nothing. They mistook the first blow of a tectonic shift for a minor earth tremor. They mistook the sound of an avalanche about to cover them for the rustle of autumn leaves. They thought it was my whim, my tantrum, but it wasn't. It was a declaration of war. And you don't come to war empty-handed. And I, thanks to Michael, was armed to the teeth. They would find out very soon. The morning at the hotel was strange. Sunlight breaking through a crack in the heavy curtains was faceless, alien. I woke up not from an alarm clock, but from a feeling of inner quiet. For the first time in many years, I didn't think about what to make Vincent for breakfast. Didn't remember that Marina had a dermatologist appointment today and I shouldn't disturb her. For the first time, my thoughts belonged only to me. There was a quiet knock at the door. It was Emma. When I opened it, she didn't rush to me with hugs and lamentations. She just looked into my eyes, seriously, like an adult, and said quietly, "Hello, Aunt Eleanor. I brought you coffee and a fresh pastry. We need strength." In this 19-year-old girl there was more tact and wisdom than in my 40-year-old son. She put a paper cup of coffee and a bag from the bakery on the table. We had breakfast almost in silence. I briefly, without unnecessary emotions, retold her yesterday's events, ending with the story of Michael's letter. She listened without interrupting, her face becoming more and more focused. When I finished, she said only one thing: my classmate is doing an internship at a very good law firm right now. Her supervisor specializes in family and property law. His name is Andrew Morrison. They say he's very tough and principled. Exactly what we need. I arranged a meeting for 10 in the morning. I nodded. The plan was beginning to take shape. The lawyer's office was in an old building with high ceilings and a quiet, creaking elevator. Andrew Morrison turned out to be a man of about 50 with piercing intelligent eyes and a face that expressed no emotions. He shook our hands and suggested we sit down. I placed a folder of documents on the polished table that I always kept at home: deeds to the house and cabin, ownership certificates, and of course, Michael's letter. Andrew Morrison put on his glasses and began carefully studying the papers. Silence reigned in the office, broken only by the rustling of sheets. Emma sat next to me, and I felt her calm support. "The documents are in perfect order, Eleanor," the lawyer finally said, setting aside the deed to the house. "Your late husband was a very far-sighted man. The house and the cabin are your personal property. Your son has absolutely no rights to them." He paused and looked at me over his glasses. "However, the fact that he and his wife lived with you may give them grounds to go to court with a claim for recognition of usage rights. This is unlikely, but they could cause trouble. Our task is to act preemptively." I was ready for this. I thought this was the main problem we had to solve. How wrong I was. "Now I'll prepare a notice of your demand to vacate the premises and cancel the powers of attorney for your bank accounts, and also block all additional cards. That's the first thing to do." He turned to his computer and began typing quickly. I watched his focused profile and felt the stone lying on my soul getting lighter. I wasn't alone. I had protection. "Let's see," he muttered to himself, going into some databases. "Eleanor Thompson. Let's check just in case if there were any recent actions on your real estate properties. No, clean. Now let's look at court registries. Sometimes people start acting before declaring their intentions. This was a standard procedure, as I understood, a routine check. But suddenly the lawyer's fingers froze over the keyboard. He leaned closer to the screen. I saw his face, expressionless until now, freeze for a moment. He took off his glasses, wiped them, put them back on, and peered at the lines on the monitor. Emma tensed. I also felt a chill of foreboding run down my spine. Andrew Morrison was silent for several long, deafening seconds. Then he slowly, without a word, turned the monitor toward us. I looked at the screen, and the air ran out. On the white background, black letters spelled out the title of the document, Petition for Guardianship and Declaration of Incompetence. Below, in the applicant field, was the name Vincent Michael Thompson. In the interested party field, Eleanor Thompson. My gaze slid further and caught on words that made my blood freeze in my veins. Attached to the petition was a medical conclusion. I didn't know this clinic, didn't know the doctor's name, but I saw the diagnosis printed in bold next to my name: progressive senile dementia. Loss of ability for self-care, critical thinking, and decision-making. Constant supervision in a specialized facility recommended. Senile dementia. I looked at these words, and the world around me narrowed to this screen. I suddenly understood everything: their haste, their confidence, their laughter last night. They didn't just want to throw me out of the house. They wanted to erase me, destroy me as a person, lock me in the four walls of a nursing home where I would slowly fade into oblivion while they calmly sold my life piece by piece. The plan was monstrous in its simplicity. Declare me insane, become my guardians, get full control over my property, sell everything, and hand me over like an unnecessary thing. That's why Vincent spoke so confidently at the cemetery: "This is your place now." He meant not only the grave. He meant the end of my life, the end of my existence as a human being, as a person. He had already written me off. The trial was scheduled in 3 weeks. They were moving fast. I felt Emma take my hand. Her palm was warm and strong. "Aunt Eleanor," she whispered. I tore my gaze from the screen and looked at her, then at the lawyer. Inside me there was no panic, no tears. The pain from yesterday's betrayal at the cemetery seemed like a pinprick compared to this abyss. This was something beyond understanding. Clinical, calculating cruelty clothed in legal formulations. And at that moment, the last drop of pity for my son that might have still lurked somewhere in the farthest corners of my soul evaporated. Its place was taken by cold, steel-like fury, not hysterical, not shrill, but quiet, concentrated fury of a person they had decided to bury alive. "Andrew Morrison," I said, and my voice sounded surprisingly even and firm. "What can we do about this?" The lawyer looked at me with new, genuine respect. "Eleanor," he replied, and metal rang in his voice. "They made a colossal mistake. They brought a forged document to court. This is no longer a family dispute. This is a criminal offense. Fraud in an especially large amount, and we'll prove it. We'll destroy them." The lawyer's words didn't frighten me. On the contrary, they brought strange, twisted relief. Now everything was simple, black and white. No halftones remained: no, but maybe, no, he's still my son. Only the cold fact remained: attempted fraud, forgery, and a plan to put me in a madhouse. My response actions ceased to be revenge. They became self-defense. Andrew Morrison acted with the speed and precision of a surgeon. While Emma and I sat in his office, he was already dictating document texts to his assistant, making calls, sending electronic letters. "First," he said, placing a clean sheet of paper in front of him and taking a pen. "We file a countersuit for protection of honor and dignity and a police report for fraud and document forgery. The medical conclusion is fake. We'll request an official examination that will confirm this. Second, I immediately send your son and his wife an official pre-trial notice demanding immediate vacation of your premises. They must move out within 72 hours. Third, all your accounts and assets are frozen for any operations except those confirmed personally by you. Additional cards were cancelled an hour ago. And fourth, he looked at me, and something like excitement flashed in his eyes. You mentioned a cabin. They were going to sell it. Yes, I confirmed. Marina said they'd already found buyers. Perfect, the lawyer smiled. I'll immediately contact the registry and impose a ban on any registration actions with your real estate. Any deal will be impossible. We'll close all loopholes. He called a courier. 20 minutes later, a young guy in a uniform jacket was already picking up a sealed envelope with the official notice. Delivery address, my house. Personal delivery with signature required, Andrew Morrison explained. They'll receive it within an hour. I imagined this moment. I imagined how he or she would open the door, take this thick white envelope in their hands, and how their world, so cozy and predictable that morning, would begin to collapse. Most likely, Marina would open the door. Vincent, I think, would be lying on the sofa after yesterday, pretending to have heavy thoughts. He'd let her deal with everyday trifles like couriers. She'd take the envelope with slight irritation, thinking it was another advertisement or bill, sign the receipt, close the door, and casually throw the envelope on the dresser. But then something, maybe the solid appearance of the letterhead or the stamp of the law firm, would make her open it. She'd read while standing in the hallway, and her face would change. First bewilderment, to Vincent Michael Thompson and Marina Thompson from the representative of the property owner Eleanor Thompson. Then arrogant smirk. Ah, Mama hired a lawyer. Decided to scare us with papers. How sweet. But the further she read, the less would remain of her arrogance. The words, illegal residence, demand for immediate eviction, 72 hours, would make her frown, and then she'd get to the main part. She'd see the words, fraud, document forgery, report to law enforcement, criminal liability. And here her world would give its first, deepest crack. Arrogance would be replaced by disbelief, then by icy, sticky fear. The paper in her hands would stop being a funny threat and turn into a real, tangible document that could destroy their lives. She'd rush into the room to Vincent, waving this letter. Val, did you see this? She's lost her mind. She's suing us. She's threatening police. Vincent would first brush it off, say it was nonsense, that she was just angry. But taking the letter from her hands and scanning it, he too would change color. He, unlike her, better understood what official documents meant. And at that very moment his phone would ring. An unknown number. It would be those very cabin buyers they'd already agreed on everything with and possibly even taken a deposit from. Mr. Thompson, good afternoon. This is about the cabin. You know, we decided to check the property before the deal, and it turned out there's a ban on registration actions on it. Could you clarify what's going on? He'd mumble something into the phone about a technical error, a misunderstanding, will resolve everything, but his voice wouldn't be so confident anymore. Hanging up, he'd look at Marina, and she'd see in his eyes for the first time not irritation, but fear. Real, animal fear. They blocked the cabin, he'd say. Marina would rush to her tablet to transfer money from their joint account to her personal one, just in case. But a notification would appear on the screen, operations on your account are suspended. Their family account, which was mainly replenished from my pension and rent from one of the rooms, was also blocked. They were cut off. The fortress they thought they had captured suddenly turned into a prison. The walls that were supposed to protect them began to move, threatening to crush. The air that yesterday seemed like the air of freedom became thick and suffocating. Panic would begin. Real panic, not the fake migraine, but cold sweat on the forehead. What are we going to do? She'd ask, and there would be no metal in her voice anymore, only hysterical notes. I don't know, he'd whisper. I didn't think she was capable of this. And in this phrase of his lay the essence of their mistake. They never saw me as a person. A personality. They saw a function, convenient, reliable, predictable function of mom and mother-in-law who was supposed to quietly live out her years in the corner, not interfering with them building their brilliant future. They mistook my kindness for weakness, my patience for stupidity, my love for spinelessness. And now this function had malfunctioned. This old woman who had outlived her mind suddenly showed her teeth, and they had no idea what to do about it. Their plan, so brilliant and simple, crumbled before their eyes because it didn't account for one thing, my survival instinct. I sat in the lawyer's office, and Emma held my hand tightly. I was calm. All the panic, all the fear, all the pain were now there, in my house. They had taken them for themselves. This was only the beginning, and I knew their next step would be an attempt to talk, to pressure me with pity, with family feelings, with conscience. They would come for me, and I would be waiting. I knew they would come. Panic is a bad counselor. It always pushes toward thoughtless, desperate actions. Cut off from money, facing eviction and criminal charges, they couldn't just sit and wait. They had to act, and the only way they knew how to act was direct pressure on me. Emma and I returned to the hotel. I didn't want to hide. On the contrary, I wanted them to find me, but on my terms, on my territory. We didn't go to the room. We went down to the lobby cafe, spacious, bright, with tall windows facing a busy street. There weren't many people. Quiet, unobtrusive music was playing. I ordered a cup of black tea with bergamot, and Emma ordered a cappuccino. We sat at a table by the window. I looked at the people scurrying down the street, at the cars, at the gray winter city, and felt detached from this bustle. Inside me was silence. Not emptiness, but silence filled with calm confidence. Emma was telling me about her studies, about a funny criminology professor. I listened to her half-heartedly, but her presence, her young, clear voice was soothing. She was my anchor in this storm. And then they appeared. I saw them through the glass before they entered. They were practically running down the sidewalk. Marina in front, in her expensive fur coat unbuttoned. Vincent slightly behind, haggard, gray-faced. They looked not like a respectable couple, but like people fleeing from a fire. The revolving doors of the hotel opened, and they burst into the lobby. Their eyes frantically darted around, and almost immediately they spotted us. Marina pointed at our table with her finger, and they moved toward us. Not walking, but almost marching, cutting through the calm atmosphere of the lobby like a knife cuts butter. Several visitors turned to look at them in surprise. I took a small sip of tea. The hot, aromatic liquid warmed me from within. I set the cup on the saucer without making a sound. Emma fell silent and looked at me. I barely nodded to her, letting her know everything was under control. They approached our table. Marina literally loomed over it, leaning on the tabletop. Her face was twisted with anger, eyes throwing lightning. Vincent stood behind her like a shadow, his gaze fixed on me. In it was a mixture of hurt, fear, and confusion. "There you are," Marina breathed out, her voice sharp and unpleasant. "Hiding in hotels, drinking tea in cafes while your only son goes crazy with worry." Worry? What an interesting word choice, I thought. I remained silent. I simply looked at her, calmly, without averting my gaze. My silence seemed to anger her even more. "What are you doing?" she continued, almost screaming now. "Letters, lawyers, threats. You decided to destroy our family, put your own son out on the street. Is this your gratitude for everything we did for you?" She paused to catch her breath, and then Vincent spoke up. His tactics were different, not direct assault, but manipulation. He tried to press on the most painful points. "Mom," he began, and wounded, filial notes rang in his voice. "Mom, come to your senses. What's gotten into you? I'm worried. We didn't sleep all night looking for you. I thought something had happened to you, and you treat me like this, your own son. How could you? Is this how mothers behave? Dad would never approve of this." Dad. He dared to mention Dad, the man whose will he had betrayed in the most monstrous way. I continued to remain silent. I let them speak their piece. I saw how their words, meeting no reaction, no response emotion, hung in the air and fell to the floor like empty shells. They were used to me reacting, making excuses, giving in, crying, feeling guilty. My impenetrable calm knocked the ground from under their feet. They were like boxers pounding their fists against water. "She's silent," Marina shrieked, turning to Vincent. "Look at her. Sitting like a queen." And she threw a venomous glance at Emma. "Found herself a new advisor. This little brat told you to throw family out of the house." Emma didn't even flinch. She sat with a straight back and looked at Marina the way you look at an ill-mannered, capricious child. Vincent stepped forward, walked around the table, and tried to take my hand. "Mom, please. Let's go home, we'll talk, discuss everything, withdraw these stupid papers. Everything will be like before. I'm asking you, for the sake of my family, for the sake of your grandchildren." His touch was like an electric shock. I slowly, without sharp movements, withdrew my hand. I let them pour out everything, all their poison, all their false hurt, all their manipulative self-pity. When they finally exhausted themselves, intense silence hung in the air, broken only by their heavy breathing. I raised my eyes to Vincent. I looked directly into his pupils, deep, so that he understood. I saw through him completely, all his weakness, all his fear, all his lies. And I spoke quietly, but so that each word hit exactly on target. "You talk about Dad. You talk about family, about how a mother should behave." I paused, letting the words sink in. "Now tell me, son, how should a son behave? Should he forge documents to put his own mother in a madhouse?" Vincent's gaze froze. His pupils dilated. He went so pale that his face became the color of hospital walls. He recoiled from me as if struck. Marina behind him froze with her mouth half open. Her face stretched, an expression of absolute animal horror frozen on it. They hadn't expected this. They thought this was their main secret trump card. They didn't know that I knew. "You signed papers," I continued in the same even, icy voice, "to have me declared insane, to lock me up, sell my house, and throw me away to die." I looked only at him, at Vincent. The world around ceased to exist. There were only I and he, mother and the one she had considered her son. "After this," I finished, "we have nothing more to talk about." I slowly took several bills from my wallet, exactly enough to cover my tea and Emma's coffee. I placed them on the table, stood up, straightened the shawl on my shoulders. "Emma, let's go." I walked toward the exit without looking back. I felt their gazes on my back, gazes full of shock, humiliation, and powerless rage. They stood in the middle of this sunlit cafe like two statues before all the visitors' eyes. Their performance had utterly failed. The curtain had fallen, exposing all the ugliness of their design. We stepped outside into the cold but fresh air. I took a deep breath. I had won. This wasn't just a victory in an argument. This was a victory over my own past, over my own naivety. But I knew this wasn't the end yet. A cornered beast becomes especially dangerous, and they would make one more last desperate attempt. After our meeting in the cafe, silence fell. Anxious, ringing silence like before a thunderstorm. Vincent and Marina didn't call, didn't write, didn't appear, but I knew this was just a lull, merely preparation for the final blow. They couldn't accept defeat. Cornered, they had to do something desperate. Their move turned out to be predictable in its meanness. 2 days later, my cousin Vera called me. Her voice was full of concerned sympathy. "Eleanor, hello. Listen, here's the thing. Vincent called, was crying into the phone. Says you're completely beside yourself with grief, that you've worn yourself out. That some Emma, your great niece, is manipulating you, turning you against your own son. He and Marina are so worried, afraid you'll do something foolish with the apartment. Anyway, we decided to get together, family style, to support you, to talk. Come to us on Saturday, all our people will be there." This was their last line of defense. Public opinion. Relatives. They decided to put on a show for a large audience. In their version of the story, I was an unfortunate widow who had lost her mind from grief, and Emma was a cunning schemer hunting for property. They, Vincent and Marina, were noble children trying to save their mother from herself and from a predatory relative. "All right, Vera," I said calmly. "We'll come." I said we. That was important. On Saturday, we arrived at Vera's half an hour later than scheduled, on purpose. We meant me, Emma, and Andrew Morrison, our lawyer. He was dressed in a strict but modest suit and carried a thin leather briefcase. When Vera opened the door to us, surprise and slight displeasure reflected on her face. She clearly hadn't expected to see a lawyer. "Eleanor, and who is this with you?" "This is my representative, Andrew Morrison," I replied evenly. Given the seriousness of the issues being discussed, I considered his presence necessary. We entered a large room. Everyone was there, aunts, uncles, cousins. And in the center, of course, sat Vincent and Marina. Marina clutched a handkerchief in her hands. Her eyes were red, from tears or sleepless nights, I didn't know. Vincent sat beside her, hunched over. His face bore an expression of universal grief. He was playing the role of a tragic hero, a misunderstood and slandered son. Our appearance with a lawyer produced the effect of an exploding bomb. Conversations died down. All eyes were fixed on us. I saw in them curiosity, condemnation, pity. They had already heard Vincent's version. Now they were waiting for mine. "Sit down, Eleanor," said my Uncle Paul, trying to speak conciliatingly. "We gathered here not to quarrel. We just want to understand what's happening. Vincent says you want to sell the apartment, leave his family, your grandchildren, on the street." Marina immediately picked up, with a sob, "We're not afraid for ourselves. We're afraid for her. This girl." She pointed at Emma with a trembling finger. "She's deceiving her. Mom was always so trusting, and after Dad's death, she's completely not herself." This was their main argument. My supposed insanity. I sat in the armchair. Emma stood behind me, placing her hands on my shoulders. I let them speak. Let all those present hear their lies in all their glory. Vincent stood up. He began to speak, and this was clearly a rehearsed speech. He spoke about his filial duty, about love for his father, about concern for me. He spoke beautifully, with anguish. "I understand Mom is having a hard time. A year has passed, but the pain hasn't subsided. And in such a state, it's easy to fall under outside influence. Easy to believe that your closest people are your enemies. I don't hold it against her. I just want to protect her. I must preserve Dad's legacy, our home, our family. This is my duty to his memory." He ended his speech on a high note, and a sympathetic murmur swept through the room. My sister Vera was already reaching for her handkerchief. The picture was almost perfect. Poor, loving son and mother driven mad by grief. And at that moment, I realized it was time. I nodded to Andrew Morrison. He stepped forward, opened his briefcase, and took out several copies of documents. Dear relatives, he began in a calm, businesslike tone that sharply contrasted with Vincent's emotional speech. Since serious accusations have been made here, I, as Eleanor's representative, am compelled to clarify the situation. He distributed several copies to Uncle Paul and Aunt Vera. Before you is a copy of a lawsuit filed in court by Mr. Vincent Michael Thompson. Silence fell in the room. The relatives peered at the papers. This is an application to declare Eleanor incompetent. He took out another sheet. And here's the attachment to it. A medical conclusion with a diagnosis of progressive senile dementia. Everyone's faces lengthened. They looked from the papers to me, to Vincent. This medical conclusion, the lawyer continued, his voice becoming harder, is a forgery. The clinic specified in the certificate confirmed that Eleanor was never their patient, and no doctor with that name ever worked there. A police report has already been filed regarding this fraud. The purpose of this scheme was simple: declare Eleanor insane, establish guardianship over her, and freely dispose of her property. The room became so quiet you could hear the wall clock ticking. Marina's face went white as chalk. Vincent stood as if thunderstruck. This is a lie, he cried out, but his voice sounded uncertain. This is all her. He pointed at Emma. She set it all up. I was just worried. I wanted what was best. I had to protect Dad's legacy. And there he said those words again. Dad's legacy. The moment had come. I slowly rose from the armchair. All eyes were riveted on me. I looked at Vincent. Not with malice, not with hatred, but with some final, bitter pity. You keep talking about Dad's legacy, Vincent, I said quietly, but my voice carried throughout the room. You want to know what Dad's real legacy was? I paused, letting the tension build. The truth. The truth he told me before he died. The truth about who you really are. The silence became absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. You're not his biological son, Vincent. You never were. He adopted you when you were a baby. Your real mother died in childbirth, and she was just a brief encounter from his past. Michael took you in out of duty, out of kindness. We raised you, loved you, gave you everything we had. But you were never our blood. Vincent's face went from pale to ashen. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Marina grabbed his arm, her knuckles white. And this, I continued, my voice gaining strength, this is how you repaid that kindness. By trying to destroy the woman who raised you. By forging documents to steal everything we worked for. By attempting to lock me away like I was nothing. The relatives sat in stunned silence. Some covered their mouths in shock. Others stared at Vincent with new understanding. So don't talk to me about family loyalty, Vincent. Don't talk to me about what fathers and sons owe each other. You lost that right the moment you decided to betray everything we taught you. I turned to address the room. This man tried to have me declared mentally incompetent so he could steal my home and put me in an institution. That's not the behavior of a son. That's the behavior of a criminal. Vincent collapsed into his chair as if his strings had been cut. Marina looked around wildly, seeking an escape that didn't exist. The police investigation is ongoing, Andrew Morrison added calmly. The forged medical documents constitute fraud in the first degree. The penalties are severe. I gathered my purse and stood. I think we're done here. As we walked toward the door, Uncle Paul called out, Eleanor, wait. Maybe we can work something out. I turned back once. The only thing to work out is justice. Some betrayals are unforgivable. And we left them there, Vincent crumpled in his chair, Marina pale and shaking, and the relatives staring at the ruins of the story they thought they knew. Outside, Emma squeezed my hand. "You were magnificent, Aunt Eleanor." But I felt no triumph. Only a deep, final sadness for the boy I had loved and lost, not to death, but to his own greed and weakness. The next morning, Andrew Morrison called with news. "Eleanor, they've contacted me. Vincent and Marina want to negotiate. They're offering to vacate the premises immediately and drop all claims if you don't pursue the criminal charges. What do you think?" I asked. "I think they're terrified. The fraud charges alone could put Vincent in prison for 5 to 7 years. Marina as an accomplice could face 3 to 5. They have everything to lose and nothing to gain by fighting." I considered this. Prison wouldn't bring back the son I thought I had. It wouldn't heal the 40 years of love I'd wasted on someone who saw me only as a means to an end. "Tell them this," I said finally. "They have 48 hours to remove themselves and all their belongings from my property. They will sign documents relinquishing any claim to anything I own. In return, I won't pursue criminal charges. But Vincent is never to contact me again. Ever. If he tries, the deal is off and I'll pursue the fraud charges to the fullest extent. And Marina? The same. They made their choice. Now they live with the consequences." 2 days later, I returned to my home. It was empty, cleaned out. They'd taken their belongings and left. No note, no apology, no explanation. Just absence where presence used to be. But the house didn't feel empty. It felt free. Clean. Mine again. Emma helped me change the locks. We opened all the windows to let fresh air chase away the lingering scent of their betrayal. That evening, I sat in Michael's old chair and reread his letter. "Live for yourself, Ellie. You've earned it more than anyone else." For the first time in 40 years, I was truly alone. And for the first time in 40 years, I was truly free. I picked up the phone and called the travel agency. It was time to see the world that had been waiting for me all these years while I was busy being a mother to someone else's child, a provider for someone else's dreams. The woman who had been abandoned at a cemetery was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone who had learned that love without respect is just another word for being used. And that was the most valuable lesson of all.